You've got shit. I've got shit. We've all got shit. So let's therapize that shit with your host, me, Joy Gerhard. Please note, I am not a therapist. I cannot and do not diagnose anyone or prescribe anything. This is just me, someone who struggles with mental illness, emotions, and intrusive thoughts, sharing what skills I've used and how I've used them. Also, trigger warning, in this podcast, I talk about sensitive topics including mental illness, suicidal ideation, self-harm, rape, childhood sexual assault, trauma, and more. I also swear here and there, so listener discretion is advised. If you're new to the podcast, some context for you. I've gotten a ton of value out of doing group therapy and watching others process their shit. In group, I can see other people's patterns and behaviors much more clearly because they aren't my patterns and behaviors, but rather they're adjacent to mine. It's such a relief. I want to share this relief with you via this podcast, wherein I practice skills while actually in the thick of shit. Each episode, I typically do an introduction and provide some context. Then I play a recording of me actively dealing with shit. This isn't me talking about psychology or theories. I'm actually in distress, having strong emotions and strong urges. You're going to hear me crying, angry, numb. But my intention is always to move through an emotion, never to stay there. So stick with me, and we'll actually come out on the other side by the end of the episode. Alrighty, let's hop to it. Welcome. Before I get into anything else, just welcome. Hello, I'm Joy, your host for Let's Therapize That Shit. If you are new to the podcast, an additional welcome, I guess. I'm welcoming veterans and welcoming new people at the same time. This is such an interesting episode. It's one of the longest delays between recording and me doing the commentary because the bulk of the episode that I'm going to be playing for you was recorded on, March 4th. And I'm recording this on July 18th. So about 4.5 months later. And it's very, very interesting to listen to myself with that much of a delay and listen back to where I was at and what was going on and see it in kind of a more objective way, I guess. Anywho, before we get into the bulk of the episode, I wanted to give just a little explanation as to why these episodes are kind of coming in fits and starts. It's summer, finally, in Seattle, and I like to be outside pretty much from the time I wake up to the time the sun goes down so that I can enjoy all the sunlight that there is. And so that's why I have been less excited about recording and or editing, especially editing. I've actually still been recording quite a lot of material. I just haven't wanted to edit it. So that's why I'm a bit sporadic right now. And I am choosing to be okay with that. So, a brief orientation to just new people. Most of the skills I reference are from the DBT manual by Marsha Linehan. DBT stands for Dialectic Behavioral Therapy, and it's my therapy type of choice. The DBT manual is linked in the description, both in PDF form and where you can buy a hard copy. Part of the reason I like DBT is because it's super skills oriented. It's what skills can I put in that would actually have me be effective. I've done other types of therapy. I've done talk therapy and EMDR and lifespan integration and cognitive processing therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. And I know I'm forgetting a couple, but DBT is my favorite. Also, whenever I'm quoting the DBT manual or really anyone else's work other than my own, I turn on a little bit of a reverb sound effect so that I sound like I'm at the Grand Canyon, or a Grand Canyon bathroom, more accurately. Just a couple things to note before we dive in. I mentioned in the recording, I talk about getting ghosted by my therapist in April. That was April of 2021. So over a year ago, not the April we just had. So what is today's episode? The recording that I'm going to play for you, I recorded on a day when the second therapy appointment in a row had been canceled by my therapist. We normally meet on Tuesdays. They were feeling ill, so we rescheduled to Friday, and then they canceled on Friday. The last episode I did, episode 20, was about that first cancellation, or rather rescheduling, I guess. And I wasn't doing so hot, and I'm doing even less hot in the recording I'm about to play for you. I do not handle the cancellation of the second appointment well. So I kind of am talking through the emotions and the thoughts that are coming up. And something to note, I started off the recording I'm about to play with a plan. I was going to do mindfulness to current thoughts and then radical acceptance, which are two different DBT skills. And what I ended up doing was some observe, some describe. I did do mindfulness to current thoughts, and I got into some validation towards the end, kind of off the cuff. And that's kind of normal, actually. I oftentimes will start off with a plan of here are the skills I'm going to use. And then as I go, I make adjustments when I realize, oh, right, I need to use this other skill first. And it's not at all surprising that I ended up going back to the observe skill as the first thing I start with, because observing is the first step in most of the DBT skills. So like mindfulness to current thoughts requires observing my thoughts. Radical acceptance requires observing that I am not accepting. Mindfulness to current emotions requires observing what I'm feeling in my body. Like all of these things require observation. I'm actually really observant to stuff that's outside of myself. I have less, what's it called? Introspection, whatever. I have less self-awareness of my own internal landscape than I do of my external landscape. So observing is important. Alrighty, so we're gonna hop into me talking about what I feel like after my therapy session was canceled. Let's get to it. Alright, so normally I have therapy on Tuesdays. And I woke up on Tuesday to find a text from my therapist saying that they weren't feeling well and they needed to reschedule. So we rescheduled for today, which is Friday, March 4th. And I woke up again to another text saying that they're still feeling really not great and that they needed to cancel for this week. Oh, and I'm having all manner of reaction to this. And I am judging every reaction, every thought that I have. I'm watching myself invalidate myself kind of constantly. And it's not feeling great. I feel like all stopped up. Like I have all this pressure inside and I can't get it out. So I thought I would do some mindfulness to my current thoughts and some radical acceptance, because I can't change the fact that my therapist doesn't feel great. I can't suddenly make them better. I can't undo our 2 canceled appointments. And given that there's no way I can really problem solve the situation, what there is for me to do is to accept how it is. So, starting off with mindfulness to current thoughts. Episode 18, I actually talk about this skill quite a bit. In that case, I'm talking about sadness. In this case, I think it's despair. So God, I feel like shit. And this is a really weird thing, because it's like the absence of emotion and it's the absence of, like, you can hear, like, I don't sound angry, right? I sound pretty calm, in quotes, and I feel like shit. And it's weird. It's a weird feeling. I don't know how to describe it. So actually, before we get into mindfulness with current thoughts and radical acceptance, we're going to start with a mindfulness skill. Observe and describe. So some context here. I mentioned before that in dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT, there are 4 main areas: mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. Mindfulness is kind of an underpinning component of the other three. Like, it's hard to do emotion regulation if I'm not aware of how I'm feeling. It's hard to do interpersonal communication if I am not aware of what I want or what I'm asking for. It's hard to tolerate distress if I am not aware that I'm in distress. So mindfulness is pretty foundational, I guess. And according to Mindfulness Handout 1, there are 3 main goals of any mindfulness practice. 1, reduce suffering and increase happiness. 2, increase control of your mind. And 3, experience reality as it is. I'm going to read Mindfulness Handout 1A here because I think it's a good idea for me to remind myself of what mindfulness is. Mindfulness Handout 1A is entitled Mindfulness Definitions. What is mindfulness? 1, intentionally living with awareness in the present moment, waking up from automatic or rote behaviors to participate and be present to our own lives. 2, without judging or rejecting the moment, noticing consequences, discerning helpfulness and harmfulness, but letting go of evaluating, avoiding, suppressing, or blocking the present moment. So, not wishing it's otherwise, not judging or condemning. 3, without attachment to the moment, attending to the experience of each new moment rather than ignoring the present by clinging to the past or grabbing for the future. So again, what is mindfulness? It is intentionally living with awareness in the present moment, without judging or rejecting the moment, without attachment to the moment. What are mindfulness skills? Mindfulness skills are the specific behaviors to practice that, when put together, make up mindfulness. What is mindfulness practice? Mindfulness and mindfulness skills can be practiced at any time, anywhere, while doing anything. Intentionally paying attention to the moment without judging it or holding on to it is all that is needed. Meditation is practicing mindfulness and mindfulness skills while sitting, standing, or lying quietly for a predetermined period of time. When meditating, we focus the mind. For example, we focus on body sensations, emotions, thoughts, or our breath. Or we open the mind, paying attention to whatever comes into our awareness. There are many forms of meditation that differ mostly by whether we are opening the mind or focusing the mind. And if focusing, depending on what is the focus of our intention. Contemplative prayer, such as Christian centering prayer, the Rosary, Jewish Shema, Islamic Sufi practice, or Hindu Raja Yoga, I could be mispronouncing all of that, is a spiritual mindfulness practice. Mindfulness movement also has many forms. Examples include yoga, martial arts such as Qigong, Tai Chi, Aikido, and Karate, and spiritual dancing. Hiking, horseback riding, and walking can also be ways to practice mindfulness. So, what I'm getting from all of this is that mindfulness gets me out of my head, because most of the time what's going on in my head isn't actually what's going on in front of me. Mindfulness is how I can access wise mind. And wise mind is what gives me the most access to what's really going on. So in DBT, there's 2 main branches of mindfulness skills. The first branch is your what skills, so what I'm doing to be mindful. And the second branch is the how skills, like how I'm doing my what. What skills are listed on Mindfulness Handout 4, and they include observe, describe, and participate. And then how I do those things are listed on Mindfulness Handout 5. And those include non-judgmentally, one mindfully, and effectively. So to summarize those 2 things together, the what I'm doing to be mindful, I'm observing and describing and participating non-judgmentally, one mindfully, and effectively. This gets us back to my observe and describe, because I feel like shit right now. So these what skills, observe, describe, and participate, are skills that I use to get to wise mind so that I can see what's real and what's true. I can only observe the present moment. I can't observe the past. and I can't observe the future. So the observe skill happens in the nanosecond before I start talking to myself about what I'm observing. So I observe a thing, and then right away my brain is going to start doing what it does. It's going to start having interpretations. It's going to start having judgments. It's going to start trying to figure out, is this safe or is this unsafe? Are we in danger? What do we need? All of this stuff. It's trying to connect what just happened to other similar situations and look for patterns and figure out how best to move forward. Hey, this reminds me of a situation that happened a while back. In that situation, like, we know the impact it had on me. I was depressed for months. So, hey, given that we don't want that to happen again, here's what I'm going to do. All of this stuff my brain is doing very, very rapidly. I think most brains do that really, really rapidly. And most brains do that automatically, meaning we're not aware of when our brains are doing that most of the time. So I'm going to start with observing. And the description of things to observe on mindfulness handout 4 include: notice your body sensations coming through your eyes, ears, nose, skin, and tongue. Pay attention on purpose to the present moment. So what's happening right here, right this second. Control your attention, but not what you see. Push away nothing and cling to nothing, which means I'm not changing the moment. I'm accepting and paying attention. Practice wordless watching. Watch thoughts come into your mind and let them slip right by like clouds in the sky. Notice each feeling rising and falling like waves in the ocean. And finally, observe both inside and outside yourself. For inside, there's a lovely little acronym, STUF, STUF, sensations, thoughts, urges, and feelings like emotions. And then outside, observing things outside myself, I do that by using my 5 senses: touch, taste, hearing, sight, and smell. And because this is a podcast, I'm not just going to do observe. I'm also going to do describe so that you know what I'm observing. Describe is a skill that helps me take a step back from what I'm experiencing. It's when I'm aware that I'm having thoughts, not being thoughts. So how to describe includes: put words on the experience. When a feeling or thought arises, or you do something, acknowledge it. For example, say, sadness has just enveloped me, or stomach muscles are tightening, or a thought, I can't do this, has come into my mind. The thought, I can't do this, is a thought. It's not necessarily a fact. Next, label what you observe. Put a name on your feelings, label a thought as just a thought, a feeling as just a feeling, an action as just an action. And of course, also an urge as just an urge. I don't like the word just. Just seems to be a thing that we use to diminish the significance of something. So I would say label a thought as a thought, a feeling as a feeling, an action as an action, an urge as an urge. Unglue your interpretations and opinions from the facts. Describe the who, what, when, and where that you observe. Just the facts. And finally, remember, if you can't observe it through your senses, you can't describe it. I do want to make an acknowledgement here that the senses that are included here are 5, kind of, I think of them as our elementary school senses. It's clear to me, the more I interact with people who have a spirituality practice, that there are other senses that exist. So I don't want to discount those. And I'm not entirely sure how to incorporate them here because I myself don't have a spirituality practice. So I'm not going to speak to that. And I want to acknowledge that that's a gap, I think, that's here. Anyway, so I'm going to do some observe and notice my body sensations. I have a tightness in my chest. I have a tightness. It's kind of like at nipple level, like on my sternum. It goes up higher into my chest, like below my my clavicle, my collarbone. There's like a 4 or 5 inch length in my chest, right along the center of my rib cage. That feels really super tight. I have kind of a lump in the back of my throat. I feel kind of like a tingly, vibraty sort of feeling throughout my body. I can feel some sort of pulsing sensation. I'm having the thought that this is stupid. The lump in my throat got bigger, I guess, lumpier, I don't know. And I have this tightness in my chest going up into my throat. It feels very surface, like at the level of like my actual rib cage rather than inside in my organs. Deeper than my skin, but not by much. I'm having the thought, we're fucked. I feel kind of a pulsing sort of sensation, like in my face, kind of along the top of my shoulders. I don't have access to whatever feeling I'm feeling. I don't know what feeling I'm feeling. It doesn't feel like an emotion. It feels like a body sensation. In the same way, like hunger is not a feeling, like it's not an emotion. I have the thought that I'm all blocked up, like there's something in my body that needs to get out. If you're new to the podcast, you likely don't know about the last several therapy experiences that I had. And I think my body is reacting from those. I think it was in April, I had a therapist ghost me. They missed our scheduled appointment and they let me know that they had to cancel it. And then they never reached out to reschedule and they didn't respond to my communication. So I had to get a new therapist, and I then emailed my therapist who had ghosted me and told them what the situation was and that I needed to find somebody who was more consistent. And again, they never responded. So I've never spoken to them about any of this. And then a couple weeks later is when I checked myself into a psych ward for the first time. And I spent a week there. And I had a new therapist, and we were starting to do EMDR together. I told my therapist that I was really struggling with emotion regulation. I felt like I was getting worse. And they recommended that I start working with a social worker who could support me in getting additional support. What I didn't realize and what was unclear to me was that that meant I wouldn't have a therapist. Like my therapist would stop working with me. And then the social worker didn't get in touch with me. And I reached out to the people I needed to reach out to, the supervisor and whatnot, and didn't hear from the social worker for 3 weeks. And the day before we finally were going to talk, I checked myself into the hospital again and stayed for 8 days. I don't know what to do when people impact me and I have no way of telling them that they've impacted me. Like, that is a situation that I don't know what to do with. I understand that it is possible for me to heal, to forgive, to accept without any acknowledgement from the person who's impacted me. That has to be the case, right? Because people die. Like, and if we needed the person who impacted us to acknowledge how they impacted us, then once somebody dies, it would be like, well, fuck, we're screwed. There's no way to heal from this thing. I will just be a raw, gaping wound forever. And I know that there must be ways to address it, and I don't know what they are. And I had the experience that, oh, here come the tears. Okay, so we're honing in on something. I had the experience that I had this massive wound. First, from being ghosted by my first therapist, by the first therapist I mentioned, who I really enjoyed working with, and we were making a lot of good progress. And then the second therapist, when I said I needed additional support, they transferred me to someone else. And then when I got out of the hospital and was finally able to talk to my social worker asked what I needed from them, what I needed, like what support I needed. And I said, I need a therapist. And they told me that they would not be providing a therapist until I demonstrated that I was more grounded and was having fewer crises. And we had that conversation multiple times. We had weekly check-ins scheduled, and every time we spoke, they asked me what I needed, and I told them I need a therapist, and they told me they wouldn't give me one. And this is not my interpretation of what happened. The phrase they said literally was, "We are not giving you a therapist," because they talked to their supervisor. "We're not giving you a therapist until you've demonstrated you are more grounded and having fewer crises." And it got to the point where my DBT skills group leader, I told her what was going on, and she's like, "Well, maybe I could be your therapist," because it's all from the same community health organization. So she went to her supervisor and then wrote me an email back that said, "Nope, we're going to stick with what your social worker recommended." And I don't know what to do to get help, because asking for help, like telling the second therapist that I needed additional support, is what had me lose my support. And then doing what I needed to do to keep myself safe while I was having a mental health crisis, like that is what precluded me from getting a therapist once I got out of the hospital. I'm just having the thought that I can't get the help that I need. I'm having the thought that saying I need help is what guarantees I won't get it. I'm having the thought that not saying I get help also guarantees I won't get it. I'm having the thought that there is no way for me to get the help that I need. I think that's why I feel stopped up, why I feel all of this pressure inside my body, because I have no way of having a conversation with these folks. With that first therapist I mentioned, with the second therapist I mentioned, with my social worker, I'm having the thought that I'm abandoned. I'm having the thought that asking for help is dangerous. And I've known this for a while. My new therapist, who I love and who's amazing, they have some chronic health issues, so periodically we need to cancel and reschedule. Every time we've had to cancel an appointment, we've rescheduled for the same week. This is the first time that we've canceled and not been able to reschedule. And I realize now that there's some stuff that I haven't processed about that whole ghosting social worker situation and the hospitalizations, because it keeps coming up. And I've been white knuckling it with my current therapist. We'll cancel and then reschedule for later in the week. And that interim, the gap between when I thought the appointment was going to be and when it actually ends up happening, I'm white knuckling it. I think I've been suppressing a lot of how I feel. Here's a distinction I don't know how to make. I think that there's a way of checking the facts that feels invalidating. Like, I'm watching myself use the check the facts skill as a way of suppressing how I feel. If you're interested in looking it up, Check the Facts is on Emotion Regulation Handout 7. And I think I did a couple episodes, or at least one episode about this. Let's find out which one. Episode 9 was about anxiety and checking the facts. And it looks like that, I know I've mentioned it in other episodes, but that episode kind of highlights it more. And I was doing Check the Facts around launching this podcast. According to Emotion Regulation Handout 7, which is an overview of ways to change our emotional responses, Check the Facts is a skill to use to check out whether your emotional reactions fit the facts of the situation. Checking your beliefs and assumptions to fit the facts can help you change your emotional reactions to situations. So, if I'm showing a piece of writing that I did to someone and they say, "Oh, you have a typo here," I can have the thought, "I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, I will never do anything right. What's the point of even trying?" None of that is what happened. What happened was the person pointed out that I misspelled something. And so checking the facts can be a useful way to acknowledge that my emotional reaction, I'm reacting to my thoughts about a situation rather than the situation itself. And all of it makes sense. All of it's valid. It all comes from somewhere. If I'm spiraling like that and having all of those thoughts because someone pointed out a typo, it's because there's something in my history that has trained me to do that. There's a reason I'm having a strong shame response or a fear response. And the reason it's useful to know that I'm reacting to not what happened, but to my thoughts about it is because those thoughts, as I've talked about before, we have ruts. My brain has ruts, like wheel ruts. And when left to its own devices, my brain will go into those ruts and just operate within those ruts because it's fast, it's automatic, it's easy. It doesn't take as much energy or attention or intention. And most of the time, that's fine. Like when I'm driving myself home, I can go into autopilot and I will get myself home without even really paying attention. It's great. It's very useful that our brains do that. And it becomes a problem. It is not effective when my brain does that and the ruts take me somewhere I don't want to go. Like those ruts were formed when I was a kid or in an earlier circumstance, and I'm not in that same circumstance right now. So it's like that quote, if all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And my brain will extrapolate what I did in the past and bring it into the present, even if those thoughts or my behavior isn't effective now. So that's why it's really useful to check the facts, to identify, am I interacting with the facts or am I interacting with my thoughts about the facts? And if I can identify that I'm interacting with my thoughts, then I can make a choice. I'm not reacting. It's not automatic anymore. So it's useful to know which I'm interacting with, the facts or my thoughts about the facts. And what I'm noticing myself do is I check the facts and I use that as a way of invalidating my emotions. Checking the facts and separating those from my thoughts about the facts so that I'm aware of what is factually happening and I'm aware of what I'm thinking about what's happening. And I've been using the check the facts to invalidate how I feel. Because I've had this kind of hopeless despair start to come up when my current therapist, has had to reschedule in the past. And I was aware that this was likely a reaction to my previous therapy situations, the ghosting and whatnot. And so I would say things like, hey, first off, my current therapist communicated around needing to cancel and reschedule. And then they actually followed up on rescheduling and set another date and then showed up to that. Like, I can check the facts that this is not the same situation that I had before. And I was still I was having the thought, like, I can't get the support that I need. I don't know how to validate that thought. I mean, fuck, guys, like, I know I've talked about this before. I think maybe it was episode 13 around burnout and shame. I think I mentioned that my current therapist had just broached the idea of doing exposure to traumatic invalidation with me. And my initial reaction was, fuck, another thing? Like, I didn't know traumatic invalidation was a thing. And I already am dealing with PTSD from multiple rapes and sexual assaults. And I really didn't want to be dealing with additional trauma. And of course, the act of treating trauma doesn't create the trauma. Like, treating it doesn't make it show up. It's like, this thing's already there. Hey, let's address it. And I was having the thought, like, fuck, another thing I have to deal with. I didn't really want another form of trauma, even though it had already happened. And I have this experience with this whole therapy thing. Like, I don't know if it counts as big T or little t trauma. I know it certainly had a significant impact on me and my mental health. I don't know if it was traumatic. It just felt really shitty. Like, not everything that feels shitty is traumatic. And I am aware of how much that whole situation, like, it was just this fucking 3 months, I think. April, May, June, July, and August. 5 months. It was a 5-month period of time when it was like one fucking thing after another. So my therapist ghosted me. I had to get a new therapist. I checked myself into a psych ward for a week. My partner at the time, wanted to break up with me while I was in the psych ward. I got out and we talked it through and everything else. and we were doing okay. And I was starting to do EMDR with my new therapist. I was really, really struggling. I asked for additional support. They said, hey, we'll get you a social worker. Then my therapist stopped working with me, and the social worker didn't contact me for multiple weeks. And so I checked myself back into the hospital again. The day after I got out, my partner said he wanted to break up with me, and we talked about it some more for a couple weeks, kind of talked things through, and then he finally said, yeah, I'm done. So I had to move out of our apartment, and I'm now living with my parents again, and I lost my job because I was working for him. It's just like, I work very hard to not make it mean all of the things my brain wants to make it mean. Like I have thoughts like I'm unlovable. I have a thought that being mentally ill precludes me from love, like precludes me from partnership, precludes me from being able to have that kind of relationship. I'm having the thought that asking for help means that I won't get it. I'm having the thought that not asking for help means I won't get it. I'm having the thought that needing help in the first place is like a fatal flaw, a personality defect. And, I've talked to some people about it, and like I've talked to friends, and I've talked to my skills group leader, and I've talked to other, I had to find a new therapist again after my second hospitalization. And so I did a lot of kind of intake interview type things, 15 to 30-minute calls to kind of suss out whether it would be a good fit. And so I told pretty much everybody the very high level, like I just lost my last two therapists, and my social worker has said, I cannot have another one until I'm no longer in distress and having crises. And everybody reacted with, what the fuck? Like, I know this is not the way it should be, which is a judgment. It's not effective. And this is pervasive, right? Like we see this all over the place. If you need help, we won't help you until you help yourself. It's this very puritanical pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing without any acknowledgement of the systems that are in place that have people be unhoused, that have people be in poverty, that have people experience sexual assault and rape, that have people experience racism, like all of this. We do this when people who are harmed voice their harm, those of us in power gaslight them. No, you weren't harmed. And if you were harmed, it's because you're talking about it. White supremacy is a fucking narcissist. There is a great post I saw that's the narcissist prayer. And I don't know who the original author of this is. A narcissist prayer. That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. And if it is, that's not my fault. And if it was, I didn't mean it. And if I did, you deserved it. I remember having the conversation with my social worker, I think the last time we spoke, actually. And I said, explain to me the mechanism by which you think that I will become more grounded and have fewer crises and be in less distress in the absence of a therapist. Like, what do you think is going to happen that will have me get into that place? And I told her that it felt like I was saying, hey, I'm hungry. And she said, great, we'll feed you once you stop being hungry. And this is not unique to me. This is, I don't know if it's unique to the United States. It feels very America, like, hey, if you're being harmed, well, it's the narcissist prayer again. First off, you aren't being oppressed. I'm not oppressing you. And if you are oppressed, the oppression isn't that bad. And if the oppression is that bad, that's not a big deal. And if the oppression is a big deal, that's not my fault. And if my oppressing you is my fault, I didn't mean it. And if I did mean to oppress you, you deserved it. So yeah, like I'm having this experience. I'm having the thought that if I ask for help, it will guarantee I don't get help. If I don't ask for help, it also guarantees I won't get help. Really, the only way to get help is to stop needing help. I'm having all of those thoughts. I'm having the thought that the only way to get help is to stop needing help, which is an impossibility, right? And there is this, like, it's crazy making, like, I have no way to talk to them about the impact that any of it had. I have no way to talk to the first therapist I mentioned, the second therapist I mentioned, my social worker, and the system's broken. It's a community health organization, so I also don't want to be the asshole who's like, hey, you're underpaid and overworked, and you have way too huge of a caseload, and you're underfunded, and you don't have enough time to support everybody, and you have your own shit because you're human, and of course you have your own shit, and you're dealing with this on all sides all the time. Like, I don't want to be the asshole who adds to it, and it has an impact. And, like, I don't know how to hold space for my current therapist who has a chronic health issue, and I understand that because I also have chronic health issues. And it's not like it's their fault. It's not something they have any control over. Well, there's also still an impact, right? So I'm noticing all of this come up because of this second rescheduling with my current therapist, and I'm becoming increasingly aware that I still have shit, unresolved shit from what happened last summer, because all of this happened between April and August of 2021. And it all just piles on, right? I lost my partner. He said it was too hard and he didn't want to be in a relationship anymore. And I thought I was handling it, like, really skillfully. Like, I knew that I needed to go get help. And I took myself to the ER because I didn't want to self-harm or have a suicide attempt. And both times, the first time in April and the second time at the end of July, the ER sent me home. They wouldn't take me the first time. I had to come back. Like, I stayed the night, they sent me home in the morning, and then I was at home for 4 or 5 hours and then turned around and drove right back. And I understand, it's the middle of a fucking pandemic. Like, hospitals are maxed out. The system is not built to handle this. Like, how do I hold space for all of that? And that it has an impact on me. And what I'm noticing as one of my gaps is that quote I mentioned from Mindful Tom. I think I mentioned it actually on episode 18, I think. He says, my therapist said the other day that empathy without self-respect will always lead to self-sabotage because you'll be able to always see the good in people, but you'll use that as a way of justifying them hurting you. I know someone else needed to hear that. Like, I'm aware I don't have self-respect. I have some, but not a lot. Not enough, clearly, to be able to handle these situations effectively. Like, I'm not equipped to handle it, and I keep thinking, it's not often that I feel the need to quote a serial killer. But in the show Mindhunter on Netflix, I don't remember which episode it is, but they're interviewing Ed Kemper, the character. It's, I don't know that Ed Kemper actually said this in real life. It's in the show. He's talking about his mother and how she knew how to push all of his buttons because she put them there. And I think about that a lot, actually. Like, I was never taught to trust my gut, to trust my intuition, to trust my own experience of the world. And I've talked about this. I don't know if I've posted the episode yet, but I talk about a passage from the book Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Borderline Personality Disorder by Marsha Linehan. I haven't read the whole book. Because I haven't read it, I can't recommend it. The reason I have it is because there's a section on it about invalidation that I felt was useful information for me to have before going into exposure therapy for traumatic invalidation. And on page 49, it has the characteristics of invalidating environments. Invalidation has 2 primary characteristics. First, it tells the individual that, I'm going to make it gender neutral here, that they are wrong in both their description and their analyses of their own experiences. particularly in their views of what is causing their own emotions, beliefs, and actions. I'm going to read that again. Invalidation has two primary characteristics. First, it tells the individual that they are wrong in both their description and their analyses of their own experiences, particularly in their views of what is causing their own emotions, beliefs, and actions. Second, it attributes their experience to socially unacceptable characteristics or personality traits. Like, I was taught that my emotional experience was incorrect pretty much all the time. I had no way of saying that I was scared or angry and have that be listened to. Of course this is coming out. Of course this is all coming out sideways. Like, it's all connected. So, like, my whole experience with my 2 therapists and my social worker from last summer is an experience of invalidation, asking for help and being told, no, you won't get help until you stop needing help. That isn't what she said. I said, I need a therapist. And she said, we're not going to give you a therapist until you are more grounded and you have demonstrated you are having fewer crises. It feels like same shit, different day. Like another flavor of what I grew up with. I couldn't be in distress. And it all makes sense. Fuck. It all makes sense. Of course it does. So I was sexually abused. I don't remember what age. I think it was age 4. And my parents didn't know about it. Like, they didn't know that it was happening until I told them as an adult that I was starting to have repressed memories come up. And of course, one of my parents told me that Satan plants false memories. So that was fun. But at any rate, so I was a 4-year-old who was being sexually abused and didn't have a way of telling anybody. I don't remember if I asked for help, and if I did, how I did. All I have are like 3 or 4 snapshots of moments as my memories. So I don't know if I told my parents. If I did, I don't know how they reacted. They don't remember. So either I never told them, or if I did, I didn't tell them in a way that they understood as, oh my God, she's being sexually abused. And apparently that's fairly common, because one of my therapists from ages ago now mentioned that happens a lot, where kids try to tell their parents, and because they're kids, they're small children, they don't have the nuance of facility with language to get super descriptive about what's happening. So oftentimes they'll say things like, I don't like that person. I don't want to talk to that person. And parents will be like, you're fine. Like, we're going to go talk to them anyway. We're going to go hang out with them anyway. So even if we assume that I never did tell my parents, so they never had a chance to invalidate my experience, I was still a 4-year-old who was being sexually abused and was being traumatized. And my parents didn't know what to do with that. And then on top of that, I'm reasonably certain I'm on the spectrum. So I was already wired differently. And so it makes sense that my parents wouldn't know what to do with me as a kid who was dealing with trauma and who was also on the spectrum. And so didn't experience emotions the way my parents were expecting or used to. So I have never believed that any of my emotions are valid. And so, of course, this whole therapy situation is basically a mirror to my childhood experiences. And I'm having the thought right now that it's fucking hopeless. I'm having the thought that I will not be believed. I will not be understood. I will not be accepted. I'm having the thought that I have no way to communicate how I feel and be heard. And it's crazy making. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating talking to cishet white men who don't have disabilities, who are not mentally ill. At least the men that I'm talking to, they have no access to understand what it feels like to not be heard, because their experience is the standard. And I feel gaslit all the time. When I try to talk about how I feel, I'm told don't feel that way. I'll be talking to my dad about how I feel, and he'll be quiet for a minute and then go, what are you encouraged about these days? Or just the other day, we were talking as a family, and he says, what gives you joy? I'm like, we were just talking about things we're angry and upset about, and that's the question you ask? It feels like such a non sequitur. It's not even an acknowledgement of what I was just saying. I mean, inherently, there's nothing wrong with that question. It would be like if I went up to you and said, hey, it's raining, and you said, what's your favorite color? Like, it doesn't have me feel heard. It doesn't have me feel understood. So, of course, all of this would be happening. Like, of course, because it's not like I don't experience other forms of harm. It's just that my wounds around invalidation are open and gaping. Like, they're split wide open. They're still bleeding. They have never healed. And so anything that touches those like raw nerves hurts way more than things that touch other places on me that are fine. Is what hurts the most, so it's what I remember the most. So I have this experience of invalidation kind of all the time, which makes sense why my current therapist and I are going to be doing exposure therapy to invalidation. And of course, today we had to cancel. I had a plan to go through this and talk about observe and describe, which I guess is where I started. I don't know that I've actually gotten anywhere. And it doesn't make sense why I feel so blocked up, because that's my experience of invalidation. Like, there is nothing I can say that would have me be heard. There's no way I can say it that would have me be heard. And so I feel, okay, I'm not going to say nothing. That's all or nothing thinking. That's emotion mind. So in past situations, I've had the thought that there's nothing I can say and be heard. And there's no way that I can say it and be heard. And it really does, like, this is how people end up like with heart attacks. Like, I'm just like bottling it all up because there's no way to talk about it. Because validation inherently is the acknowledgement that somebody else's experience makes sense and is caused and comes from something. Even if it doesn't fit the facts, it still makes sense. Oh, you're having the thought that you're a failure because I pointed out a typo? That makes sense. It came from somewhere. That's why judgment's a problem, right? We on the outside are looking at somebody else's experience, and all we see is a snapshot. We don't see all of their history, all of their lived experience, all of their trauma, all of their beliefs, all of that, and how it created these patterns of thought that would have them have that thought when I point out a typo, for example. Judgments are only ever narrow. Like, because we're human, it is physically impossible for us to fully get another person's experience. So when we say, you shouldn't have those feelings or you shouldn't have those thoughts, we're saying, I know better cause and effect in your life than you do. And given all of the dominoes that fell before, this final domino should not have fallen. It's hubris. It really is hubris. And it sucks. It sucks being on it breaks relationship, right? It's a failure to see another person's humanity, a failure to see another person's experience and acknowledge that it is caused and came from somewhere. It sucks to be on the receiving end of that, sure. And it also sucks to be on the giving end of it for different reasons. It feels much better. Like, judging feels great. It's aggressive certainty. It's like, oh, here's a thing that is all or nothing. Like, I am positive in this place. It's much more comfortable than living in the gray. And it creates all manner of emotional and relational disconnect. Like, judgments separate me from my own empathy. It separates me from my humanity. It separates me from your humanity. If I could distill myself into a 30-second story, here's the story that I would use to distill myself into. When I first started DBT, At the beginning of each module, we go over kind of the central tenets, like our assumptions, the assumptions that we're going to be working from collectively, so that we're all on the same page, we have our agreements. And one of them is that all behavior is caused. And my instructor is going through this list of things, and he gets to all behavior is caused. And there's 8 or 9 of us in the room, and we're all silent and listening, and people are taking notes and stuff. And I laugh out loud. I'm like, my behavior is not caused. My behavior doesn't come from somewhere. It doesn't make sense. It's irrational and illogical, and I'm hysterical, and it like just shows up out of nowhere. And he looked at me, and I don't even remember what he said, but looking back at it now, it was clear. I was like, oh, I'm saying the quiet part out loud. Like, I'm saying all of my beliefs about myself that I've never voiced before, but that I had been operating from those beliefs my entire life. I'm saying them all out loud now. Like, I have never thought that my behavior makes sense or is caused. I've never thought my emotions make sense or are caused. And I just consistently have the experience that I cannot talk about how I feel and be heard. So I'm noticing I don't have that tightness in my chest right now, which is encouraging. I think that's my physiological response to invalidation. Like, it literally feels in my body, kind of lump in my chest and in my throat. I think it's me having the belief. It's like a physiological manifestation of my belief that I cannot say how I'm feeling. I will not be heard. There is no way to resolve this. Like, all of those thoughts, which all stem from invalidation. So it makes sense. And maybe that's the antidote, right? Maybe validating my own experience is the antidote to invalidation. Because basically this entire diatribe, that's a judgment. Diatribe's not a judgment, but it feels judgmental. This entire monologue has been me trying to understand the mechanism of how my thoughts came to be and how my experience came to be, and why my current therapist calling in sick feels like the end of the world, and why my attempts to check the facts around it have been ineffective at having me feel better, because I'm not checking the facts effectively. I am checking the facts in a way that is invalidating my experience. I am distinguishing my thoughts from the event, and then I'm tending to the event, and I'm not tending to my thoughts. Or more specifically, I'm not tending to the emotions that are caused by those thoughts. Because it feels like I'm having the judgment that it's an overreaction. And as my original DBT instructor said, there's no such thing as an overreaction. Every reaction is proportional to a person's experience in life, and other people on the outside can't see that. So I've been judging my reaction. I'm like, it doesn't fit the facts, Joy. It's not the end of the world. Your therapist isn't ghosting you. They're out sick. And I have not been tending to the emotions that come up and seeing how they make sense. So I guess that's what there is to do. Some self-soothing and listening to those emotions, acknowledging them, listening to them, asking them what they need and what they're trying to do for me. I'm going to go to the gym now. I will come back and do self-soothing. Fuck. I'm just having the thought right now, hence the expletive, that anybody listening to this is going to think, oh, look how calm she is. I don't think it's calmness. I think it's numbing, masking, something. Like, I don't feel calm. I don't feel okay right now. I'm frustrated that my experience internally doesn't translate into anything that you can hear. Because one of the things that really bothers me is, I mean, all of this is a coping mechanism on my part, that I have to get super, super calm when I'm upset, because I have not been believed when I'm visibly upset. Like when I'm crying and my voice is raised, or I'm gesticulating a lot, or I'm talking from a place of anger and whatever else, like I've been trained that if I do that, I will be discounted as hysterical. So really what I'm getting here is that I have the belief that there is no way for me to demonstrate my emotions and have them be heard, have me be heard while I'm having them. I'm tone policing myself, I guess. Like I don't feel the freedom to talk about how painful all of this was. Like I certainly don't have the freedom, I don't feel the freedom to talk about that with my social worker. She was the one telling me, you need to have fewer crises and be more grounded before we give you a therapist. And I felt really, really angry about that. And I was never able to tell her how angry I was about it because I had the concern that being angry would prove her point. It's like it's a fucking catch-22. I can't talk about my emotional reaction to being told I'm hysterical without proving to someone that I'm hysterical by showing an emotional reaction to that. Oh, fuck. Okay, I'm gonna go to the gym now. Okay, welcome back to the present. A couple corrections before I do anything else. I misread the overview on Emotion Regulation Handout 7 about checking the facts. I said the word checking when I meant to say changing. So in describing the skill check the facts, I should have said, check out whether your emotional reactions fit the facts of the situations. Changing your beliefs and assumptions to fit the facts can help you change your emotional reactions to situations. I said checking your beliefs and assumptions. That's not correct. Changing your beliefs and assumptions to fit the facts can help you change your emotional reaction to situations. That is the correct version. Also, I did find the author of the Narcissist Prayer, Danya Craig, Danya. Craig, Craig. So thank you, Danya, for that. Another thing, I mentioned the book Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Borderline Personality Disorder by Marshall Linehan. And I said that I've talked about it before, which I have in episode 20. So if you were at all interested in that and want to hear more about that, go check out episode 20. And also the link to where you can buy the book is in the description. Another point I wanted to make is that at some point in the recording you just heard, I mentioned that I'm reasonably certain that I'm on the autism spectrum. And since that recording, I have officially been diagnosed. So it's official, I guess. I'll be sharing more about that in future episodes. All right, so to kind of like wrap up what you just heard, the recording I just played. Towards the end, you heard me notice something that I wasn't doing. I wasn't accepting the emotions and thoughts that were coming up as a result of my therapy session needing to be rescheduled. And you actually heard me notice in the moment that I was using the skill check the facts to beat myself up for having thoughts and emotions. Because I was like, hey, my therapist has not ghosted me. This is not a repeat of what happened last summer. And I kept using those facts as a way to stop feeling angry or anxious or like shit, that ever ethereal description. And I'm left sitting here wondering now, what would happen if I actually allowed myself to have those thoughts and emotions? Like, what would happen if I acknowledged that that situation with my current therapist needing to reschedule because they were ill is not the same as past therapists who ghosted me. And I also still have emotions and thoughts come up. Like, both of those things can be true at the same time, right? My therapist needing to cancel because they're sick is not the same as being ghosted. And I have thoughts and feelings come up that I think are residual from being ghosted. Because clearly, like, there is so much that I didn't process about that experience, the ghosting from the summer of 2021, like having two therapists in a row disappear on me, my experience of asking for help and being turned away. It was traumatic. I'm actually going to say it. It was fucking traumatic. It's not the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced. And clearly there's stuff that I haven't actually healed from about that. And it makes sense that I haven't healed from it because at the same time as all of this was happening, I didn't have a therapist. So I didn't have a way to like process my experience of having a therapist ghost me. I didn't have a way of processing what it was like talking to my social worker who would not assign me a therapist. Like all of that stuff just got tapped down and like sealed up. And now it's coming out sideways the way emotions do when I don't feel them. Like emotions have to be felt. They have to be. And if I don't feel them in the moment, I'm going to feel them later. So I know this is a skill that I don't have, at least not right now. I don't have the skill of being able to check the facts and not invalidate myself. I am using the skill of check the facts to invalidate myself. I don't know how not to do that. I also am unable to validate, if somebody has hurt me, I'm unable to validate their experience without invalidating mine. If somebody has hurt me and I go to validate their experience, I will use that as a way to invalidate my own. I do not currently have the skill of being able to hold both the person who has harmed me and my own experience as valid at the same time. I hear that this is possible. I hear that this is a skill that I can learn. I don't have it currently. So I kept like whacking myself over the head with, hey, don't feel sad and anxious and angry that your therapist canceled because it is not a repeat of last summer. And I was like suppressing that I felt angry and sad and anxious, which is not effective. And as my therapist has told me, that is not the skill of check the facts. Like I'm using the skill incorrectly. So we need to actually talk about that in a future episode as well. Like how to actually check the facts in a way that does not invalidate the emotions that I'm having. Because they're part of the facts, actually. Like the fact was, in the recording you just heard, that my therapist was rescheduling an appointment. They were not ghosting me. They were in communication. They rescheduled. They were letting me know. And that is different than what happened the summer before when I was ghosted. So it is a fact that I was not reliving the summer of 2021 when my current therapist, rescheduled. It is also a fact that I had a lot of anxiety and sadness and anger come up. That's also part of the facts. Fuck, I'm really annoyed here. Like, this seems like a really self-evident thing to notice, and I didn't notice it. Like, I was not including my emotions as part of the facts of the situation, because they were. I was having those emotions. That's factually what was happening. Yeah, okay. I'm judging myself right now. I'm like, Joy, that you should have known that. And I didn't. Like, I didn't see it at the time. I'm seeing it now. I didn't even see it. So when I edit my episodes, I listen to the whole thing and, take out really long pauses or the fucking crow outside my window. I'll take that out, blah, blah, blah. And while I'm listening, I will take notes about things that I want to put in my intro before the recording and my outro after the recording. And I didn't catch that. I didn't add this to my intro or my outro, that my emotions were part of the facts of the situation. I'm catching it now. Well, I feel sheepish. And I'm having the judgment that I should have known that in the moment, in the recording. And if not then, I definitely should have caught it, like noticed it while listening back to the episode and editing it. And I also didn't do that. And I'm judging myself for doing neither of those things. And there's a reason that I didn't catch it. Fuck. I'm really annoyed. Of course, the reason I didn't catch it is because I was so busy judging myself and invalidating myself. And what I notice is that I do this. I invalidate myself, or I anticipate invalidation from others. And that becomes the thing that is the focus of all of my energy. So I was invalidating myself in the recording you just heard, and that was taking up all of my energy. It prevented me from actually looking at what would have made a difference. Like acknowledging my thoughts and feelings would have made a difference. Oh, Lordy. Okay. Well, now I know not to do that in the future, or at least to be aware of the possibility that I might be doing that in the future. So clearly this is something that I need to practice. I need to practice checking the facts and including my emotions and thoughts as part of those facts. Wow. Okay. Still judging myself for that. Anywho, I'm going to sign off here and thank you all for listening and coming along on this strange and riotous ride with me. Yeah, it's lovely to be back at it and be posting episodes again. So I hope this is helpful. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you want clarification on anything, do not hesitate to email me or drop me a line on any of my social media platforms. I'm at Let's Therapize on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can also email me at therapize@joygerhard.com. Links to all of that shit is up on the website, which is linked in the description. So, yeah, I'm just gonna, do my standard thing and end this super abrupt. This has been Let's Therapize That Shit with your host, me, Joy Gerhard. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, subscribe, and tell your friends about it. I'll see you next time. Intro and outro music is Swan Lake Opus 20 by Tchaikovsky, performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Anatoly Fistulari, and released on LP by Richmond High Fidelity London Records in 1952.